Marina, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me to this amazing show. I feel like a very strong European, so when I saw the title of your podcast, I was like, I will participate. I will join.
You were meant to join us, and I believe you're fresh out of teaching a class about defense and the future of the military in Europe. So I'm glad that we've got you while you're thinking very much about this, even more than you normally might. I guess my first question is there is this plan to spend a hell of a lot more money on defense in Europe in the years to come. Before we get to the tricky question of where that money is supposed to come from, what is it exactly that we're planning to spend this money on?
So, as you probably know, Europe is pretty weak when it comes to its defense capabilities. That's just a fact. Like some folks called it free riding, others said, like Europe was focusing on civilian and normative power, but when it comes to military capabilities and also the readiness of European forces, Europe is weak. And now, with the election of President Trump, I think there was a decision that we need to change that. And I think it will kind of go into two big chunks of programs. The first one is to acquire military capabilities, especially the capabilities that we do not have and where we rely on US, equipment so far. And the other thing I think is also to build up our forces. So this is personnel and this is training.
There seems to have been pretty much a lot of back and forth already in discussions around building up defense in Europe. So one day we hear about plans to spend 800 billion, and the next we learn that Italy and France are opposing a 5 billion injection to buy ammunition from Ukraine. So my question is, how do you think when it comes to the core priorities of European defense, are all countries in the grand scheme of things moving in the same direction, or is it just another case of a European ship with no captain?
Mm. So I think I'm sitting in Berlin when I'm talking to you. I think Germany's role here is absolutely critical. I think a lot of the previous attempts to build up European defense didn't succeed because Germany wasn't on board. And I think this is really different this time. The incoming Merz administration seems absolutely determined. I'm sure you have heard that two packages passed, or one can even say three different packages passed last week here, both of our houses, the Bundestag and the Bundesrat. And and defense is front and center. And I really think that Germany is serious at this time. And so, if Germany, as still the largest European Union member state, is serious about defense, I think something will happen. Of course, like there will always be some countries that don't join. And in the big picture of things, like it's okay. I think like they should have the liberty and freedom not to join every program. But if there is, like a sufficient large amount of countries that is serious this time, and I think Eastern Europe is serious, Scandinavia is serious, I think Germany is serious. So far, also Great Britain, and I'm very happy that they're back. I think they're also very much on board. And I think also, like the French, in the larger picture of things, they are on board with these initiatives. The Dutch are, I think the Belgians are. Of course, like then you have maybe a Hungary and maybe a Slovakia right now under Fico, much more hesitant. Meloni, we can discuss, like where Italy stands, but I think she has also an interest in bolstering Italian defense industries. So in the big picture of things, I think this is really, this is a game changer, and I think we will see something happening.
You are speaking to us from Germany. It is the biggest economy in Europe, but also the country that has been really wary of us having a strong military since World War II for obvious reasons. And after the full-scale invasion on Ukraine, Germany famously had a supposed turning point in its military policy, which resulted from very modest sending some helmets to actually being the biggest partner for Ukraine and sending the most crucial and stable support to them. So we are now seeing yet another major turning point in Germany's defense policies, and I would like to know which one do you think is the most important?
Well, when it comes to the money, now the recent Zeitenwende that we have seen enacted last week is certainly more important than anything that has ever happened in German defense history since the end of the Cold War. And like of course you can ask like what has shifted, and it is the United States. right? So like it wasn't the invasion of Ukraine. I mean, that triggered something. I think Germans did wake up that Russia was a revisionist power and you couldn't trust them. But very quickly after the invasion, the Germans kind of, they're I still like the term free riding. I think they thought, like the United States is fully on board and the Biden administration was fully on board. German military aid and also in general, non-military aid grew because when the Republicans took over again in the House, so after the midterm elections in the United States, there were a lot of Republican delegations coming to Berlin and saying, you need to step up. So we very much saw also US pressure. And, with the inauguration of Trump and just in general, his relationship with Putin, how he treated Zelensky in the White House, all of this kind of accumulated in like what we see today. Of course, I think there's always like also a flip side that is important for everybody to know. And this is the economic situation in Germany. So I think if the German economy was booming, we maybe wouldn't have seen such a massive investment package. But there is, of course, also like the idea that this massive investment package in defense, coupled, of course, also with infrastructure and now 100 million in climate, will boost German productivity. You will have spillover effects. You will have, production lines that Volkswagen and Audi no longer use, that they can be taken over by Rheinmetall and other defense industries. So, I think first and foremost, this, the backstory is one of first Russian aggression, then, the shaky situation of the transatlantic alliance, but then also there is an interest in combining defense spending with a revival of the German economic base.
So that is the idea, that we would spend loads of money, but more money kind of gets generated out of it. At the same time, it's an astonishing amount of money, 800 billion euros. Where is that money supposed to come from? And how realistic is this plan to raise that money?
So in Germany in very particular, and like the EU is a little bit of a different story, but Germany has a fairly low debt to GDP ratio. Right. So the UK, I think it's about 105%. In France, it's over 100%. Germany, it was 60%. So yes, for in the kind of like the Western European world, Germany can increase its debt level. And this is what happens here, right? So like Germany now goes from about 60% to 80% of debt to GDP. And, in the Euro framework and given that it is still the third largest economy in the world, Germany can stomach this. It was the big puzzle was rather before why Germany had this very stringent debt limit, and why it was had such difficulty also during the Euro crisis, but was a philosophical ideological decision, and this kind of was let go now. On the EU level, on the one hand, it is small loans that come at a low interest rate. I think that's like 150 million. Here again, this, I think, comes partially through the European Bank of Reconstruction, and partially it's just other loans. In the big picture of things, I think this is feasible. And the other one, the 600 billion, this is that you kind of loosen borrowing limits that were part of the Growth and Stability Pact of the Euro. So in the big picture of things, you make in a very different form, but you kind of allow members of the Eurozone to take on more debt. Also, of course, kind of building on the kind of the credibility and viability of the euro as a currency, right? And this is if you listen to some critics, they basically say, in the long run, it will undermine the credibility of the euro as a currency. Others would say, it is one, whether you look at the Draghi report or kind of other reports, this is exactly the stimulus that is needed. Now it comes in a very different shape and form. Draghi never really mentioned a massive defense stimulus, but in the end, it is a type of stimulus that he also asked for.
Mm-hmm. Also, reportedly, EU countries leaders have discussed taking on joint debt as a part of the effort to fund this. For people outside the Brussels bubble, Why is that so controversial?
Yeah, so the especially Germany, when the euro was created, it was very scared that you had other countries, especially kind of looking south, that already had a pretty high debt to GDP ratio, and they were now using the euro and the credibility of Germany and kind of like northern euro countries to further go into debt. And kind of um, not have a good control of their spending habits, right? So like the Germans, but also the Dutch, saw themselves as very controlled public spenders and very reasonable public spenders, and like then folks were being excused, but it starts in France and then Italy and Spain and Greece, of course, that like they were kind of wasting a lot of their resources. And so like when the euro was created, there were very stringent criteria on how much debt you could actually issue. And like now all of this gets loosened, and of course the fear is and the criticism is that it will get out of control, and so that yes, maybe there will be now some kind of investments in defense, but in the big picture of things, it goes also into whatever that is, other infrastructure or even kind of social programs, and you financing your friends inside of the government and outside of it, right? And these kind of things.
Mm. I mean, yeah, it's interesting you mentioned like where does the money actually get spent and how do we spend it efficiently? Because there's been a lot of focus on reaching higher percentages of GDP on defense spending. Is that definitely the best way of making us actually safer, just focusing on how much money gets spent? And also, this idea of spending more as a percentage of our budgets than we were previously spending on defense, as opposed to, the other places that money is going to have to come from, which is the health budget, the education budget, welfare support, everything else. There's not necessarily any incentive to spend the money more efficiently or effectively, is there? Like, is there a risk that all of this extra spending will just beef up the industry, yes, and maybe create a lot of profit for a few individuals and companies, but not necessarily make us that much safer at the same time?
Yeah, so again, in Germany, it's like one of the exceptional cases, but since I think it is such a critical player in this question, the idea, and it was very much criticized, but the idea right now is that you don't necessarily have major cuts in other areas. That's why you have these massive spending packages, right? I mean, it is these 500 billion on infrastructure and like 100 on climate, and then in addition, which is even undefined, on security defense measures. I think in other countries it will not be that way, but you're 100% right that just talking about money is not useful. So I teach strategy, and like in my classes, the first thing that you always determine is what's actually your objective. What do you want actually to achieve? And then you look at like where do you get the resources from? And here I think like Europe is still, and Germany certainly, like it's still in the unclear, right? It's not entirely certain what we actually want to achieve. So do you want to protect Ukraine from Russia? So will Ukraine then become a European Union member state? Or is it, that you're just protecting European Union territories? Or like, are we certain we want to protect the Baltic states and, like the eastern flank? Is what we actually want to do? Uh, or is it in the end, like Germany's just building up its own defenses? So like they're drawing the line then, like maybe the Polish border. And all of this is very big. Even like right now, the German government, like there are no clear answers. Uh, and I'm very much, like in my capacity here at the Hertie School, and when I talk to different representatives of the government, I always say like, what is it? What is actually the goal? What are we trying to achieve here? Because in the end, right now, it is in the end about it's fear driven, and as said before, it is kind of like a measure to cope with the German economic recession. I think it's both. But the end goal at the German level, and certainly not at the European level, is actually not, like the kind of what are we actually trying to achieve is not certain. And, like it also kind of boils over into what kind of institutional framework do we really want to do this? Because right now it is about money, but if you really want to coordinate this, like there needs to be a lot of coordination, and it's unclear whether the Commission will do this, or is there kind of some other like NATO Europe organization that will actually do this, and how can we integrate non-European Union members into all of this, like, and here I think specifically of the UK and Norway, all of this is kind of like just massive question marks. Right now it's just, like there is money on the table. And of course, like money is better than no money, but it's certainly not enough.
Yeah. And there is, as you say, this huge impetus to use this as an opportunity to boost the rather lackluster European economy while we're also building up our defenses. But we do need all of this stuff that we want to buy sooner rather than later. Can European companies start producing all of this extra stuff as quickly as we need it? Would it maybe be easier to just buy it from whoever can make what we need pretty quickly and at the right price?
Well, here again is the big question. What is it that we actually want to achieve? Do we want to save Ukraine? Then we have there's a huge time pressure because, negotiations are ongoing as we speak, I think, in Saudi Arabia. But if no consensus is found and no agreement, probably the war will proceed. And Russia is certainly right now in the material advantage, that's for sure. Although it's also kind of like, not extremely strong anymore when it comes to these capabilities, but Ukraine is lagging behind, and if the Americans are no longer helping Ukraine, then we need to do it, and there's probably then we need to buy it off the shelf. But if the objective is something else, meaning we're actually kind of hoping for some kind of settlement in Ukraine, however that looks like, and we are trying to protect, let's say, European Union territory, you have different estimates, but it looks pretty clear that also for Russia, it would take a while. They speak of like 4 to 5 years, if not more, to really have any kind of capability to threaten them. And then, of course, we can. There is time, right? I always say, if there is political will and there is money, you can do a lot of stuff very quickly. But both of this needs to be there. And in 4 to 5 years, you can build a lot of stuff. If this is really like your top priority.
You mentioned this idea of forming some sort of European NATO wing, and there's been a lot of talk over the past couple of weeks about the need for a coalition of the willing in Europe to lead this effort to boost our defense. And to what extent is that coalition already emerging, in your opinion? And who are the main countries who look, well, less interested in joining that coalition?
So there's still a lot of mystery, right? Who will join this coalition of the willing? I don't actually, apart from a firm British and French contribution, I haven't heard of any other contingents that have been confirmed. In Germany, of course, fair enough. Scholz can't decide it. He's the outgoing chancellor. Merz hasn't been confirmed yet, so I don't think he could say anything on that front. So I'm tapping as much in the dark. Maybe you know more about. I just know that Polish government has not confirmed any contributions so far. I think probably you will have. There are. I'm certain that Scandinavian countries, probably also Baltic countries will join. Of course, there's always a trade-off. Should we protect our own country, or should we go to Ukraine, right? This is very often the trade-off. And so I don't think that the Polish government is refusing to join out of, they're not interested in Ukraine. But any kind of, contingent that goes to Ukraine cannot protect our own borders. And I think this is this concern. But, I think this is to be seen how this coalition materializes. But once again, which I think, of course, is very interesting. I was just in London last week. Great Britain seems to be the leader of European defense. I'm personally very happy that they're back. I miss them a lot. But who would have thought, that this happens after Brexit and this entire drama.
And then at the same time, you have countries like Hungary who seem not so interested, but are within the EU. Does it matter if not all EU countries want to be involved in this to the same extent or at all?
In the big picture of things, no. Because Hungary is fairly small. Of course, it can be a spoiler. We have to be very careful because, of course, when it gets to sensitive information, Hungary can also leak this information. So that's why it is, I would much rather have a Hungary on board than outside of it. But if you really want to build up European security and defense, you need a critical amount of European Union member states, and whether Hungary participates in this or not is not absolutely critical for the success of this endeavor. So if France or even in Italy, if Germany would completely oppose it and obstruct it, I think it gets much more complicated. But for the time being, Hungary is not potent enough to kind of completely stall this initiative, right? But again, it can leak information, it can just cause trouble. Every single time we see this, there have to be negotiations. Basically, the Hungarian leadership gets bribed, right? So then somehow, kind of agree to some kind of deal. There's special bilateral deals often done. All of this is like extra noise, extra complication that we don't need. But I think if Europe really wants to rearm, then I think it can do it without necessarily having Hungary on board.
Yeah, so also some numbers caught my eye recently. Poland allocates almost 5% of its GDP to defense. Baltic countries spend between 3.5% to 6%. Portugal has made a heroic pledge to reach 2% by 2029. And Spain lags behind at just 1.3%, and they're having a really hard time increasing that number. So I was wondering, you don't need to be a scholar to see the pattern, and I still believe that defense and defending ourselves against Russia is essentially a pan-European challenge. So do you think there's a chance that this burden could be distributed more evenly?
So look, and by the way, in all big countries and federations, in the United States is the country that I know the best. You have certain states that do more and others do less. Certain states are interested in certain topics and others are not so interested in certain topics. And I think that just comes with geography, that comes with history. And, Portugal does this, has, his own advantages and disadvantages. And I think in certain situations, if they don't block initiatives, I think it's okay. If they don't necessarily engage to the same extent in these defense efforts as, for example, the frontline states as the Baltic states and Poland, right? So I think this is also like in a federation, quasi federal system. I think you need to also give states this leeway, right? This is the difference between a kind of voluntary a union that the European Union still is, and a mandatory kind of like top-down system, right? And this is not what Europe is, and I think it's a strength of Europe, right? That you can kind of opt in and out in a, of course, helpful and productive and constructive way. And I think for the time being, I still see this. I still see, that the Portuguese are, as a fairly constructive, and also, to a certain degree, Spain. So I think we should give them this freedom, so to speak, to choose.
I wanted to finish this conversation, Marina, by asking you about the human side of all of this and the potential human cost if, God forbid, there are further conflicts on this continent. This plan is not just about having more guns and bombs, it is about having more troops that could potentially defend us. And obviously, no country likes sending its people, in particular its younger people, to be killed in a war. Can you give us a sense of how different countries around Europe are thinking about this need for bodies? I mean, we have pretty different policies around the continent when it comes to conscription and military service, also things like civil preparedness and getting citizens aware of stuff like, really basic things like where to get shelter. How are we preparing for this? How are governments thinking about this across the continent?
Yeah, very important question because indeed the approaches here have been very different. And I would always kind of juxtapose the Scandinavian approach and to a certain degree also the Eastern European approach, then the German approach, and then maybe France and Great Britain. So, and my favorite approach so far has been the Scandinavian approach because it basically tells its population, and probably you also saw this very famous brochure now that they distributed last year, how to prepare in case of war, I think it's called. And like it explains in very plain language, an attack on our country is a possibility, but we can do things to stop it, right? We are prepared, and here is what you can do, how you can get prepared. And like you can actually draw strength from this preparation. And I think this is very smart because I deal with young people all the time, especially in Germany until basically Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They were told in Germany that war is an impossibility. But it always has been an illusion, right? I mean, like there was always war around us. And to tell Germans, this will never touch you, it will only happen in Africa or in the Middle East, is just wrong, right? So, like, there were reasons for why politicians in Germany kept up this narrative, but in the big picture of things, they had created a bubble, and so I think it was necessary to burst that bubble. It was an artificial bubble, but still, now the defense ministry here tries to recruit young people. At least this was under the Scholz government, with the slogan of join the military, it will be an adventure, right? You will learn a lot, and you will grow. I don't think that this is a good narrative, right? You shouldn't join the military to seek adventure. This is not about deploying to faraway places in Africa and the Middle East and contributing to peacekeeping operations. This is really protecting your continent, democracy, the rule of law, right? Everything that we have achieved here in Europe, and so I think it is much more a civil duty. Well, by the way, I'm also very much in favor that that young women and men need to serve in the military, right? This is our duty. This is like if we want to keep up, what we have built here, which I think is absolutely beautiful in the European context, we need to also be willing to defend it, right? Because there's no automaticity anymore. So this is, and I hope that the new German government will change this and adopt much more the narrative that comes out of Scandinavia, right? So like, yes, there is a threat, but we can deter it, and even if something happens, we are prepared and we can defend ourselves. And then there's a third narrative that, of course, comes much more out of the UK and France, the European military powers, where this is just like a long legacy of just serving in the military and having, even family traditions of being in the various military branches. And again, I think this is also not something that is very suitable to other European countries, because it's very much kind of like a legacy tradition thing that these countries bring, also related to kind of colonial endeavors and these kind of things, right? So I think the most useful approach, and how I think you can mobilize people, is the Scandinavian approach to say, we have built an absolute beautiful community, and we need to protect it because it is under attack. Also, like in North America, and we need every single one of you to do your part. And some will do it in a kind of a security and defense and military way. Others will do it politically. Others will do it, like in the private sector or in media, like wherever that is. But it is now a task that we have at hand. We have to rise to this occasion, and like everybody needs to participate.
It seems like the perfect message to end on. Thank you so much for your time today, Marina.
Thank you so much.
No, it was a pleasure. Anytime. Yeah. Okay. Greetings from Berlin then.